We're going to explore some of these books that are mentioned of in the Holy Bible but are nowhere to be found. They're missing, lost, or forbidden books of the Bible that are actually mentioned and quoted of in the KJV, Holy Bible. The question I have to ask myself is, why were these books removed from the Bible? Why were they quoted? What type of information was in these books, and why were they taken out of the Bible? 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 says that all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. Going back to the beginning of verse 16, it says, all scripture is God-breathed. Now, at the time that Timothy wrote this, there were other books that they had that they considered part of their canon that were, quote unquote, God-breathed. The early church had access to these books, and I believe that you cannot fully understand the mysteries and wisdom hidden within the Holy Bible without having these so-called missing pieces that were taken out or hidden from you, forbidden for you to read, that were accessible by the early church. They had these books. The more study that you do, you find out the book of Enoch and different books were taken out, and they contain a lot of key information about the spirit realm, about angels and demons and how they operate and interact with mankind to this day. It also pulls back the veil to some of these ancient gods that were being worshipped by the early pagans, and these types of rituals that are still being perpetuated today by most of Eastern religion that actually bleeds over into Western Christianity today, with these different holidays and things like that that are still being kept for veneration for the ancient pagan gods. In the book of Enoch and many of these other books that we're taking out of the Holy Bible go into great detail about these worships. Did you know that the book of Jude almost didn't make the cut into the canon because it mentions the book of Enoch? It actually quotes it directly. Jude chapter 1 verse 14 says, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Again, this is Jude directly quoting the book of Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9, which I'll put up on the screen now. The book of Enoch is a very powerful read. If you're trying to understand the spirit realm, how demons and angels and unclean spirits operate in the ethers, and how they affect us here on the earth, the book of Enoch is a must read. The next quote we're going to look at comes from the book of Joshua, and also is quoted of in 2 Samuel, and this has to deal with the book of Jasher. Joshua chapter 10 verse 13, and the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and haste not to go down about a whole day. Joshua 10:13. The next quote is in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 18. Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. The books of Enoch and Jasher are available to read. I'm going to link them below in the description. The rest of these books are missing to our knowledge. I'm sure they're buried somewhere deep within the Vatican, but they do raise questions about the information that is in them, and they're actually quoted of in the Bible verbatim. The next we have is a book called The Manner of the Kingdom, or the Book of Statutes, 1 Samuel 10:25. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. Again, this is referring back to a book that Samuel wrote called The Manner of the Kingdom. This next verse is going to pretty much knock out 3 birds with 1 stone, or 3 books with 1 stone. You have the book of Samuel the seer, the book of Nathan the prophet, and the book of Gad the seer. 1 Chronicles 29:29 says, "Now the acts of David the king, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of Samuel the seer, and in the book of Nathan the prophet, and the book of Gad the seer." The book of Nathan the prophet is also mentioned of in 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 29, and this also lends to some other books that we're going to quote as well. But the verse says, "Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, first and last, are they not written in the book of Nathan the prophet, and in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the vision of Iddo the seer against Jeroboam the son of Nebat?" Wow, there's a couple more for you. The story of the prophet Iddo, which we just mentioned of in that last scripture, that's also quoted of in 2 Chronicles 13:22, which reads, "And the rest of the acts of Abijah and his ways and his sayings are written in the story of the prophet Iddo." I'm asking myself, who is Iddo the prophet and what is his story? And there's these other prophets who come forth and these other seers that had books that were quoted. I don't know about you, but I want to know what was in those books. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 41 talks about the book of the Acts of Solomon, which reads, "And the rest of the acts of Solomon, and all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon?" Solomon is a very interesting one because another book when it comes to understanding the spirit realm and understanding phrases and names and demons that are mentioned of in the Bible. Even one time they're quoted of in the Testament of Solomon. Is this the same book? Is the book of the Acts of Solomon the same as the Testament of Solomon? It could be. But then again, in the Apocrypha, we also have 2 versions of books called the Wisdom of Solomon that's mentioned of in the Apocrypha. You can actually get your hands on those books, the Wisdom of Solomon and the Testament of Solomon. Definitely get the Testament of Solomon for sure. Everyone knows those stories. It's in Jewish lore, Jewish mysticism. Everybody reverts back to Solomon falling into sin and things like that. Those stories come out of the Testament of Solomon. And the Wisdom of Solomon, like I said, is actually in the 1611 Apocrypha, the earliest versions of the KJV version that we all have come to love and enjoy had the Testament of Solomon in it, and 14 other books that were mentioned as well. Why were they taken out? Did you know the Catholic Church still has those books within their Bible? They still revert back to the doctrines in those books. Here's an interesting one. The book of Shemaiah the prophet. 2 Chronicles 12, verse 15. "Now the acts of Rehoboam, first and last, are they not written in the book of Shemaiah the prophet, and of Iddo the seer, concerning genealogies, and their wars between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually?" Who is Shemaiah the prophet, and what did his book say? The book of Jehu, 2 Chronicles 20:34. "Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of Jehu, the son of Hanani, who is mentioned in the book of the kings of Israel." The sayings of the seers, 2 Chronicles 33:19. "His prayer also, and how God was entreated of him, and all his sins, and his trespasses, and the place wherein he built high places, and set up groves and graven images, before he was humbled. Behold, they are written among the sayings of the seers." I want that book. The book of the covenant, Exodus 24:7. "And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people, and they said, All that the Lord hath said we will do and be obedient." I think it's interesting to note that some scholars believe that Exodus chapters 20 through 23 are actually what is being quoted here as the book of the covenant. So some people believe that. The next book is the book of the wars of the Lord. Numbers 21:14 says, "Wherefore it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord, what he did in the Red Sea and in the brooks of Ammon." I want to also point out that there's several mentions of letters in the New Testament that Paul wrote, and he refers back to other churches and says like, remember when I wrote to you about this, or remember when I told you this? And then there's no evidence that he actually did that in that chapter or even other chapters or whatever, but it's believed that he's referring back to some other letters that he sent those churches that are not in the Bible. Some of those letters supposedly you can still get your hands on today. I'm not going to quote those in this video, but I will put them in the article below in the description if you want to check those out. Now there's another book that refers back to the Acts of Uzziah, which aren't in the Bible, but 2 Chronicles 26:22 kind of talks about Isaiah the prophet writing about Uzziah the prophet. And so it just reads, now the rest of the Acts of Uzziah, first and last, did Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, write. Again, we don't have that book either. There's no record of the Acts of Uzziah. Another book that is directly quoted is the Annals of King David, which says in 1 Chronicles 27:24, Joab, the son of Zeruiah, began to count the men, but did not finish. Wrath came upon Israel on the account of his numbering, and the number was not entered into the book of the Annals of King David. There's also another book which is known as the Chronicles of King Ahasuerus, and there's two different mentions of this book referring to the king. But Esther chapter 2 verse 23 says, and when the inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Esther 6:1 also says, on that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So it's referring back to this book called the Chronicles of the King, which was the King Ahasuerus at the time. Another chronicle of a king that's mentioned here, we have Esther chapter 10 verse 2. This is the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, when the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Those are just a couple of the mentions of these so-called chronicles of these kings, or different chronicles that are mentioned. Again, there's a whole bunch more. I'm not going to go into detail in this video about those chronicles. I will link them in the article below. Make sure you check that out. Now, we covered a bunch of these books that were actually quoted of in the Bible. Like, these books were actually mentioned of and read in the Bible and quoted, and you can actually go there and find them yourselves. There was a bunch of other books, especially the Apocrypha, which was actually books that were in the early versions of the Bible. Again, they were in the 1611 version. They were taken out later. Why were they taken out? What was the information within them? You can actually read the Apocrypha by itself, or purchase a 1611 version King James Bible, which they make copies of. You can go to Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, all that good stuff to get those books. And it's very interesting to have the Old English version that has all of those books within them. It's also interesting to note that there's a bunch of early writings from the early church fathers that have some powerful information in them as well. Now, they weren't in the Bible, but they were passed around. They were books that the church fathers had, even books that the disciples had, and people who were inspired by Jesus or by the disciples. One of them, which is a beautiful book to me, and it's a really deep one, is the Recognitions of Clement. Now, it's said that Clement was a disciple of Peter, and there's actually mentions of him running in with Peter and I think running with Barnabas as well. And some of the information in that book talks about how demons get access to the body by the way of digestion and food and gorging oneself on meat. There's just some very interesting stuff in those books, and I've kind of given myself over to trying to understand the spirit realm. What can aid us in understanding how spirits operate in the world and what type of influence that they have upon our body and our minds. And there's so much information out there with stuff that leads to demonic oppression, demonic possession. You see Christians who can't seem to get victory in their life because they're entertaining things that are demonic or ungodly or whatever it is. And so a lot of these secrets were in these early church writings that were taken out and kept hidden from us. Jesus understood the knowledge of these books. He definitely did. There's a bunch of stuff pointing back to the Testament of Solomon, to the book of Enoch. Jesus and the disciples, they knew about this information. We're in the dark. Oh, you don't need to worry about that stuff. Just, you're asking too many questions. These kind of things that, many pastors and leaders in the church tell you when you ask the bigger questions. But I'm telling you, Jesus and the disciples knew the information that were in these books. And if it was good enough for them, if they needed it, I feel like we do too. And again, I know it sounds crazy, but I don't think you can fully understand the Bible without these other books. For an example, Jesus is talking about casting out demons and all of these type of things. And the Pharisees come up and they see Jesus healing people, casting out demons. And they say, hey, you're only doing this by the prince of demons himself. You're doing this by the order of Beelzebub, under his power. Who is Beelzebub? I know we're told in church, and at least I was told, that Beelzebub was Satan. He's the prince of demons. It's Satan. Well, if you read the Testament of Solomon, it goes into great detail about this entity by the name of Beelzebub or Beelzebub. And I'm going to tell you what, it's not Satan. It's not the devil. It's a different entity and power all in and of itself. And Jesus reverts back to this text when he says, look, we're talking about casting out demons. We're talking about principalities and powers. You have one greater than Solomon standing in your midst. So he's referring back to Solomon's knowledge of the spirit realm, Solomon's knowledge of hidden powers, which he was involved with, and kind of left a blueprint behind on how to deal with these powers as well. This is King Jesus referring back to Solomon. Again, if we believe that the Bible itself is inspired at least, then we have to understand again, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 says that all scripture is God-breathed. Not some of it, not for a period of time, but it says all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. I think that's interesting to note too. You can be trained and equipped for every good work, but this word here, you will be thoroughly equipped. Maybe that's it. Maybe we're equipped, we're just not thoroughly equipped. There are many mysteries in the Bible. There are many mysteries in the Spirit, and I know we're not going to be able to understand everything, but we do have keys that were left behind. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of information that is within the Holy Bible, and you'll spend a lifetime just dissecting those books if you like. You don't have to go outside. You're not really missing out on anything. But if it calls you, if you're a Berean, if your heart is to know the mystery of the gospel, is to know the mystery of how this stuff works, it beckons me. It calls me. Deep calls unto deep. I want to know, man. If it was good enough for them, if they knew it, I want to know it. I think my heart kind of goes back to, what did they have? What was the Christianity that Jesus had, that Paul had, that Peter had? What were these guys walking in? How were they walking in power? What did they know? Did they know that every sickness was an infirmity? Did they know that every disease was a spirit? In the way that they approached it a little bit differently. I think they got the knowledge from those books. At least they wrote it down and kept journals, and then we have access to a lot of it. A lot of it's within the scriptures, man. You can really tear the scriptures apart, but these books are in the scriptures too. At least they were at one point. At least know what's in them. And I'm gonna tell you now, it's not as taboo anymore to read the book of Enoch. That's a great place to start. It's not taboo anymore. 10, 15, 20 years ago, you were laughed at, mocked, and ridiculed for going outside of the Bible to look at Enoch. Now, there's a bunch of pastors and teachers and evangelists will pull things out of Enoch and kind of mix it into their sermons. So this book is kind of becoming more widely accepted, and it's not so taboo to go read the knowledge that's within this book anymore. There's YouTube videos everywhere. Some of your favorite pastors, teachers, and evangelists are sharing knowledge that's in the book of Enoch. I remember watching TBN and seeing Benny Hinn kind of allude to some things that are in Enoch, but he knew that he couldn't say it on TV at the time, and this was 15 years ago. But Benny Hinn definitely understood the knowledge held within the book of Enoch, and he would share it, almost kind of lording it over people's head without saying, yes, I got this out of the book of Enoch. It's accessible for you. Before I end the video, I want to do a quick roll call on these books that were mentioned of in the Bible. Really quick, we'll go down the list here. We mentioned the book of Jasher, the book of Enoch, the manner of the kingdom or the book of statutes, the book of Samuel the seer, the book of Nathan the prophet, the book of the Acts of Solomon, the book of Shemaiah the prophet, the book of Abijah, the book of the story of the prophet Edu, a book called Visions of Edu the seer. So we have Edu's vision and we have his story. And then we also have the book of genealogies of Edu. We have the book of Jehu, the book of the saying of the seers. Again, I want that book. The book of the covenant, the book of the wars of the Lord, the book of Gad the seer, the chronicles of the king Ahasuerus, the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia, and I also mentioned the Testament of Solomon, the Wisdom of Solomon, and the Recognitions of Clement. Those are some that I'm really into. There is a ton more. There's a bunch more. There's the book of Adam and Eve, and the book of Abraham. Like, there's so many other books that were read by early church fathers, and they held them near and dear to their heart. Again, thank you guys for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Click that notification bell to get notified when I put out new material. I'm gonna link below to the article with all these scriptures in them and some of the ones that I didn't quote as well. I'm also gonna put a link to some of these books that you can actually purchase on Amazon. The 1611, the Apocrypha, the book of Enoch, the book of Jasher, and even the Recognitions of Clement. I'm gonna link to all of that stuff via my Amazon. If you shop via my Amazon link, I do get credit for that. So thank you guys for supporting my work. It really means the world to me, and I'm gonna say peace and shalom. This video would not be possible without the help of my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys for supporting my work. If you'd like to become a patron, there's a bunch of cool stuff that you get access to. Head on over to patreon.com/TruthSeekah. Just go over there and check out the rewards. I dare you. Peace, peace.